Mr. Eugenio and Mr. Luigi, we just want to make sure you are on the right channel to hear the translation. Make sure you click on the bottom of your screen. There will be a globe icon, and you should choose your language of preference. That would be either English or Italian. There will be 60 minutes of Italian interpretation, and the full session will be translated into English. So please make sure you hear. We will start translating in the next few seconds. And if you could answer us on the chat or
Alô, alô, por favor.
Please take your seats.
Bom dia, bom dia.
Good morning. We will start the session. I would like to invite Professor Celso Campolongo, Dean of the Law School, and our generous host for the session today.
Onde você está? Acho que está aqui. Não, é ali. Aqui. Obrigado. Eu queria convidar também...
Thank you, and also I'd like to invite Mr. José Carlos Dias, President of Comissão Arns. And I would also like to invite Raquel Dodge, former Federal Attorney General.
Agradeço muito a todos e todas que estão...
And I'd like to thank you all for being here today. I will start with my opening remarks for the next 5 minutes, and then I will pass the floor to Mr. Carlos Dias, Mr. Celso Campolongo, and Ms. Raquel Dodge. This text is not long, it's double-spaced. At this moment, as we conclude the 50th session of the Permanent People's Tribunal, we would like to bring to context the minutes of the accusation that was brought forth by the lawyers here present and the relevance of the sentence. The Brazilian population have always worked on having not based on less human and more human when taking consideration people. So this relates to race, slavery, indigenous population. Brazil's racism today is always brought back from the past, from our slavery time, is that it has been extended to our present time. So it's not about heritage, but a component that is continuous and is always updating the various periods of our republic. Democracy in Brazil has not been able to ensure the Black population and to the indigenous population the full protection of their fundamental rights. And the role of the state is always undermined by taking away the human aspect and racism of these populations. So within the process of the Constitution of 46 in 1988, many government administrations within the rule of law, as the last 3 ones of Fernando Henrique, Lula, and Dilma, if considered from the perspective of human rights, took a step forward when it comes to democratization in Brazil. Although the affirmative policies and the very relevant quota legislation, the 21st century, Black Brazilians are nearly absent from all the power branches, legislative areas, higher courts, in the specific executive corporate roles, and also in the lower seats in the statistics of our country, and the Black women are the most hindered. So in the day-to-day activities, specifically when it comes to the peripheral areas of the metropolitan areas, the military police attack the Black, perpetrating a greater number of execution that is extra legal worldwide. In terms of the indigenous population during the Republican time, what has prevailed is a contradiction of policies of protection, incitation to continuous genocide, violation of their rights have not been sporadic and accidental, as the National Commission of Truth brought forth. They are systemic and they come from structural policies of the federal government that take them forward. So they have always worked on this type of administration, although the importance of each has varied. The interpreters have not received the text from the speaker in the panel. The COVID-19 pandemic has made blunt the weak context of the indigenous population, the Black population, when facing the virus. This brutal context became clearer after the elections of 2018 with the assault of the neo-fascist right-wing government, as it was shown with the minutes presented by APIG, the Coalition of Black Rights, and the Public Services International and Arns Commission in the second year of extreme right-wing administration. So this was opportunity to increase the violations that started in the beginning of the administration. So it was requested to the PPT that President Bolsonaro would be condemned for practice of crime against humanity of unproportional extension on the Black population, health professionals, and genocide against indigenous populations. So we expect that the sentence will be presented and will follow the accusation. So this is taken forth by a very important tribunal, and it will always, as mentioned by Eloisa Machado, the only condemnation of the international crimes committed by President Bolsonaro. Other than that aspect, the sentence will also come together with the claims against him by the Arns Commission and APIB to the International Criminal Court in Haia, as it has been also taken forward. So the PPT is also bringing and expecting to defend justice as its dean, Celso Campiloni, hosted us to defend democratic constitutionalism. So this sentence comes 1 week before September 7, as Del Roy has mentioned, where the celebration of 200 years of our independence will be hijacked, as it was announced by a government that already brings threat of military coup. So after all the democratic government, after the Constitution 1946, that all the military forces will support a political campaign bringing in severe illegal process. So today's meeting, in this space of great dignity and courage, as this student council room takes on threats against dictatorship and to resist democracy. Let's stop military coup and may Brazil's democracy carry on.
Obrigado. Eu queria registrar.
Thank you. I would like to just acknowledge the presence of Margarida Genova, honor member of Comissão Arns, or Arns Commission.
Muito obrigado. Então eu quero passar.
Thank you very much. So I will pass the floor now to Mr. Celso Campilongo. Thank you very much, Professor Paulo Sérgio Pinheiro, a great friend, fighting with me together in so many discussions together in this college in Brasilia. It's great to see you here again in the law school at this moment that is very special. I am very proud, and it's a great moment for our law school to be here holding this activity and also be able to have the sentence be given here that is so relevant to our country. And the first steps to prepare this event, I had Ms. Laura Greenhog, well, she requested, and I said, there's no problem, it will be a great honor for our law school to host, but I'll just ask you, please. And I know that many of the former students of our school are part of the Arns Commission, but I would like, among those alumni and professors, that at least 2 professors could send me a formal request to have this student council reserved for the session. And after a few hours, Professor Fabio Condor Comparato called me, and I felt very uncomfortable when he told me, Professor Campilongo, can we sign this request, myself and Professor Dalmo Dallari, and what should I answer? And I said, Professor, there could not be a higher qualified pair to request that. Definitely reputable honorary professors committed with the democratic traditions of our law school as a few, so that could not go any better. Unfortunately, after a few days, Professor Damadalari passed away. In any case, I received the formal request from Professor Comparato as if it had been also signed by Professor Dalmo, and in my heart, I must say the last request made by Professor Dalmo to myself. It is a great satisfaction to realize in the environment, in the student council room, a place for all of us that were fortunate to study in this college.
Muito aberto à polêmica, à discussão.
Very important in terms of the polemic, in terms of debate, to diversity. But I must say, but today's date, the whole composition of this auditorium, the diversity present here today, nationally and internationally, with the streaming of this event online, brings a magnitude when it comes to the moment we're going through and the importance of the sentence that will be read. This is very notorious to us and very special as well. The diversity in this auditorium opposes structural racism that unfortunately still stains our society, authoritarianism that underlines the social relationships in Brazil, the prejudice that unfortunately still stains our society. And all of this brought to a higher extent by fake news, by a gradual dismantling of democracy, by the offenses in terms of the rule of law, and unfortunately by the constant threat of coup. And this college has the duty, due to all the threats, to be aligned with those that protect the rule of law, democracy, and the plurality and diversity of our society. I am certain that the sentence that will be read in the continuity of this event means to our college and to our students a great opportunity, a great learning moment, and to reaffirm the democratic commitment of the law school of the San Francisco. So thank you very much. We're very proud to hold this event. Thank you, Comissão Arns and Professor Paulo Sergio. Thank you, Celso. Thank you very much. And I must say, we'd like to thank you again for the generosity. I'd like to pass the floor now to our jurist and former Federal Attorney General, Raquel Dodge. And I just like to include the fact that the first visit to any authority that the Comissão Arns did was to meet Raquel Dodge, where we were able to understand all her dedication to the recognition of the indigenous population. So it's a great honor to us to have you here with us. Good morning. Good morning, everyone. I would like to greet especially all the members of the civil society present here and willing to keep building Brazil's democracy. I'd also like to greet the members of the Permanent People's Tribunal who are watching the opening of this session, and especially Professor Paulo Sergio Pinheiro, Mr. Carlos Dias, President of the Arts Commission, and Professor Celso Campiloni, Dean of the Law School, for leading the second historical session of resistance to democracy in Brazil and bringing influence to our Brazilian society's perception to protect our democratic value and our constitution. I'd also like to greet the petitioners who represent a PIB, the Association of the Brazilian Indigenous Population, the Black Coalition, Coalizão Negra, the family members of the victims of COVID, and especially the professors, current ones and the honorary ones of this law school that have contributed to the text of our petition. Ladies and gentlemen, at the end of the summer of 2020, the pandemic of coronavirus had made clear that with its trip through our planet would take many lives, will deteriorate health, and would bring great damage, and would increase important public debate so that governments could take rational decisions, democratic ones, on the value of science, on ethical criteria to distribute scarce material in terms of efficient vaccination to protect life, health, and the dignity of everyone that are marginal to our society, minorities, poor and rich, and not only a few human beings. The civil society meets in this academic context to learn about the opinion of the Permanent People's Tribunal about the effects of the pandemic on Black, indigenous population, and healthcare professionals, brings the combination of pandemic and authoritarianism, and if they are compatible with the democratic rule of law. The Constitution of 1988 brings the human individual to be protected, guaranteeing human dignity as a pillar to rule of law, and the trust that all human beings here in our country hold the same dignity, citizenship, and are subject of rights and freedoms that cannot be taken away. The Constitution demands efficiency in defining and in managing public policies to protect life and health, and also demands that we can all be treated the same way in equality with no discrimination. In order to not be misunderstood. There are four goals of our Constitution. First, to build a society free, fair, and solidarity. Second, to foster the good of everyone with no prejudice of origin, race, gender, color, age, and any other ways of discrimination. Third goal, to eradicate poverty and the marginal population. And fourth, to reduce social inequality and regional inequality. The Constitution established health as a human right that must be protected through public policies, not just any public policy, but the ones that are efficient and inclusive and not discriminatory. The Constitution was created to stop the course of our history with slavery, exploration, and decimation of human beings by other human beings, but also by the Brazilian government. It wanted to stop a past history of different dictatorships that came one after another in our recent history, and that used force to suppress rights and freedom. The Constitution wants also to invalidate civil laws and public policy that discriminate and nourish in our country inequality, protection to the elites, and violence. Nobody can ignore and not follow the Constitution. It's the most important law we have. It's demanding because it encourages that government uses reason and not the impulse of each government individual. It expects that we should not just be indifferent and wait to see the acts that include fear, death, repression, and discrimination, since it does not consider them natural acts and those to be allowed. The Constitution brings us all to determine a path that is fair, has solidarity, and is inclusive. To take strong steps forward and maintain our democracy, we need to have public policies that respect all individuals and not just a few. We must apply our Constitution and be committed to the four goals. And that is only possible if we know well the facts that harm us, the atrocities that we cannot accept, the conducts that must be punished so that will not never be repeated. We must build a collective memory to understand clearly what we can no longer tolerate. The sentence of the Permanent People's Tribunal that was requested by the Arns Commission, by a PIB, and by the Coalizão Negra, and also by the Public Services International of Brazil, that was drafted with the sensitivity and clarity of many important major jurists in our countries that are here from this important law school, will help us defend the democratic rule of law. So again, I'd like to tell you all I'm excited to be here and expecting and looking forward to the sentence. Thank you very much.
Muito obrigado,
Thank you very much.
Dodge.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Dodge. Before I give the floor to our colleague, Mr. Tognoni, I would just briefly like to celebrate some people present here this morning in the room. We have here with us one of the judges from the Permanent People's Tribunal, legal scholar, Kenarik. Kenarik, where are you? Ms. Kenarik? Bujikian. Also, we have the Association of Judges for Democracy, Mr. Castro Neto, the Brazilian Archdiocese, Odilo Pedro Sherry, represented here by priest José Rodolfo, who's the legal attorney. And I would like to say that Cardinal Odilio has sent a letter to the president of Comissão Arns. We have the group Torture Nevermore, Tortura Nunca Mais, Ethos Institute, CCEP, Juan Maria Lopes and Maria Betânia da Silva, Cinesul, Rafael Martins, Lúcia Gianesini, Gueledes, which is the Institute for Black Women, here represented by Ms. Maria Silva de Oliveira, Alana Institute, represented by Mr. Pedro Mendes da Silva and Guilherme Pecoral, Oxan with Ms. Katia Maia, and also Marinédia Portonato. We have here also Helena Nader and our colleague Manuela Carneiro da Cunha. We have many universities here represented. Mr. Renato Stutman, who is the coordinator of the studies for indigenous populations in the Americas in the University of São Paulo, and also representing the Department of Violence Studies at the University of São Paulo, we have Gustavo Ibri and Roberta Novel. Also, the Secretary of Human Rights of the City of São Paulo, we have here Mrs. Secretary Sonia Francini, and Mr. Secretary of Justice, Fernando José da Silva.
Fernando José da Costa, desculpa.
Fernando José da Costa, the speaker corrects himself. Thank you very much for your presence here this morning. Unfortunately, we cannot name everyone, but the next part of this panel will be the reading of the sentence. And after the sentence, we will have some comments coming from the claimants, or from the authors of the sentence, rather. And also, we will have representations of the AVICO, which is the Association of COVID Victims. We will have Senators Humberto Costa and Randolfo Rodrigues, who will join us online. And we will also have comments by Mr. Dario Copenaua Yanomami, who is here present with us. And also, to finalize, we will have Mrs. Shirley Machal, Mr. Edio Silva from the Black Coalition, Dube Belchior, representing the Black Coalition for Rights, and Mrs. Sonia Guajajara, who will be presenting the APIB, the Association of Indigenous Peoples of Brazil. After we finish the Permanent People's Tribunal session, we will have some final remarks, and Mr. José Carlos Dias, and also Maria Vitória Benevides, José Luiz Del Royo, Manuela Moraes, who is the president of the Students' Council of the School of Law. And then, right after that, we will finalize on time, hopefully. Just one correction here, and my apologies. Luiz Orzatti Filho, Executive Secretary of Justice and Citizenship in the state of São Paulo, and he's representing the governor of the state of São Paulo. Thank you very much. Mr. Diaz reminds me that if you still have not grabbed your headsets, your simultaneous interpretation headsets, for those of you who are in the audience, we have simultaneous interpretation headsets now.
Okay. Hello, Gianni Tognoni. Good morning in São Paulo. You take the floor to coordinate this part of the session.
Okay.
Please.
Thanks for this opportunity, which is a great honor for the Permanent People Tribunal to be present with a verdict, which is the results of a long work of collaboration with different judges. Many of them are present, others could not be present today, but the work which has been conducted for the analysis of all the documentation which have been presented both in written form and the public hearings has produced a very important amount of evidence on which to base what will be this verdict. My presentation now for simply just to remind some of the characteristics of the work of the tribunal will be very short in order to leave the space to the presentation of the verdict by the two judges who have been in charge of that, Raul Zaffaroni and Luigi Ferraioli, who is also the president of the tribunal. The Permanent People's Tribunal has accepted the request presented by the Comissão de Defensa dos Direitos Humanos, Dom Paulo Evaristo Ans, la ANS Commission, de articulação dos povos indígenas do Brasil, de Coalição Negra por Direitos, the International de Serviços Públicos de Brasil, to hold a session targeted to pronounce a judgment on Jair Messias Bolsonaro, President of the Federal Republic of Brazil, on the basis of an act of accusation submitted to its attention following a period of instruction as foreseen in the statutes of the tribunal on April 2022. The main focus of the tribunal are the systematic violation of the fundamental rights of the Brazilian populations perpetrated through the policies adopted in the management of the COVID-19 pandemic. The act of accusation, which has been presented and considered by the jury, is annexed with a very important documentation to this verdict, and is essential part of the documentation. The core of the accusation presented by the above representatives of the Brazilian civil society can be summarized as follows. By profoundly abusing of its institutional powers, the government of Jair Bolsonaro, primarily in the person of the President of the Republic, has transformed a very severe health emergency, requesting adequate and well-targeted protection provisions, into an occasion and instrument to attack specifically already discriminated populations, formerly qualified as disposable, such as the indigenous Negros, Quilombolas, while at the same time accentuating the inequality, the disregard, the violence already diffused in the more vulnerable groups of the country, making more difficult or impossible the access to public services, those violating their human rights to life and dignity. The consequences of this violation of the fundamental constitutional rights have been quantified also in an important excess of thousands of deaths, in a situation characterized also by a lack of administrative, political, economic, cultural support of the health structures. The whole policy on the vaccine is a concrete and exemplary case to document the disregard of these measures. The health personnel through all—
Mr. Jenny, your paper is in front of your camera.
Part of the victimization of those who were supposed to be in charge of the protection and care. With its decision to proceed in the process of this session, the Permanent People Tribunal recognizes that the criminal charges formulated and carefully documented in the act of accusation correspond to its competences as generally described in the articles of these founding statutes, which is the Universal Declaration of the Right of People, as well as more specifically in the juridical provision of this new statute, specifically in the Article 3, which defines its competence for the crimes against humanity. In compliance with its methodology, widely tested in the course of the experience since the beginning of this activity in Bologna in 1979, and through 49 cases and related verdicts, the PPT has assured that the act of accusation had to be supported principally by direct testimonies of the violation, with the support of doctrinal reports, and taking into consideration the abundant documentation which has been produced on the same and similar themes by many actors and organizations of the Brazilian society. Of obvious particular importance in the analysis and qualification of the evidence to be considered for the formulation of this judgment are two main sources of information assessed by the Permanent People Tribunal. First, the final report of the Parliamentary Commission on the Pandemia realized by the Federal Senate. Second, the communications of the Articulação dos Povos Indígenas do Brasil, of the Arts Commission, and of the Colectivo de Advocacias en Derechos Humanos, presented to the procurement of the International Criminal Court for the consideration of responsibility of President Bolsonaro. The public hearings of this 15th session of the PPT took place at the Nobel Hall of the University of Sao Paulo Law School in Sao Paulo on May 24 and 25 of this year, according to the program reported in Annex 2. The procedure of the PPT, from the acceptance of the act of accusation to the public hearings, has been formally and with due anticipation forwarded to the attention of the President Bolsonaro and to the accused parties of the Brazilian government, inviting them to be present and to exercise their right of defense. The tribunal did not receive any specific answers of insurance to this invitation. The panel of the judges has been composed by Luigi Ferraioli, Professor Emeritus of the University of Rome, Alejandro Macchia from Argentina, medical doctor and epidemiologist, Sir Claire Roberts from Antigua Barbuda, former Minister of Justice, former President of the Inter-American Commission of Human Rights, and Judge of the Supreme Court of the Caribbean. Eugenio Raul Zaffaroni from Argentina, former member of the Supreme Tribunal of Argentina, Judge of the International Court, or Inter-American Court for Human Rights. Kenaric Boyakian from Brazil, former judges of the Justice Tribunal of Sao Paulo. Luis Moita from Portugal, who is at present sick and cannot be present, professor in the Universidade Autónoma de Lisboa, with main research interest in the area of peace and war. Nicoletta Dentico, Italy expert and journalist on global health, who also had a big problem this last night to be present. Rubens Recupero, Brazil, ambassador and former Ministry and Secretary General of the United Nations Conference on Commerce and Development. Versilene Diaz Calunga from Brazil, leader and lawyer Quilombola. Baroness Vivian Stern from the United Kingdom, member of the Lower Chamber, specialized in criminal law and human rights. The act of accusation will be obviously consulted by those who are, because it's ready and available for those who are checking the details. For the present presentation, the tribunal has decided to concentrate the attention on two presentations, one which is the motivation and the content of the sentence by Raul Zaffaroni, and then a comment and implication by Luigi Ferraioli. Thanks, Raul, to present his text.
Thank you very much, President. A acusação apresenta ao tribunal complexo
The accusation presents the tribunal a complex at the light of international law. We highlight units of planning and resolution from the government of Brazil, headed by its president, Mr. Bolsonaro. A government action of this nature involves several people that necessarily agree with it. The first thing is to see what is the statute of President Bolsonaro in this participation. In the factual complex presented to the tribunal, where several evidence were annexed, the status of Mr. Bolsonaro as an author is unquestionable. He heads a government with a presidential system according to the Brazilian Constitution, and he's therefore responsible, according to the Constitution, for us, together with ministers, to be the leader of the federal administration, according to Article 34. The second topic, a plurality of illicit facts. We are in the face of several illicit facts or several infractions. It is fully proven that the health policy promoted by Bolsonaro's government was decided and executed as the expression of one single willingness of the government, so a unit of solutions. Politics has had several damaging results, but these results do not configure a plurality of facts, and in that sense, health policy in the face of the pandemic leads to one single illegal act besides the solution unit. So it's a unit that is of legal devaluation, as we will see this is led by the concept of crimes against humanity. However, of the independent facts, several independent facts are present in this case, and even if the severity of the political health decision places shadow on the perception of simultaneous facts, that cannot escape the tribunal's attention. The health policy decision would be one single illegal act with two possible legal qualifications. But the case of stigmatized human groups, it's unavoidable that the depth of all types of discrimination in a highly unequal society, promoted by no one less than the leader of the executive power, is necessarily seen as a constant threat made by the highest authority in the country against all people who belong to stigmatized human groups. A discourse of this nature is not limited to exposing an ideology, but rather incites insistently people to despise human dignity of their colleague citizens, not just of minorities, but of women as well, and with the sexism contained in his statements. And that is, of course, translated into reinforced sexism that produces thousands of feminicides registered by the press. Unavoidably, this discourse is a warning to discriminated groups that can only see this as a threat, limiting their liberty to express themselves and to move. This is not gratuitous. Public speech, ongoing public speech, violation of human rights has unforeseen consequences. And as we have said, most of the times they can be lethal. Therefore, we state that the stigmatization, repeated stigmatization of social groups, including non-minority groups, from the President of the Republic is a clear violation of human rights of all people discriminated by the insisting presidential speech. According to international law, this based on Article 2 of the Declaration of Human Rights and on several other articles of other international instruments. We will now see the legal qualification of the policy of health ahead of the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic. Having stated the first fact of violation of human rights, now, although the concept of crimes against humanity can be problematic, the act pointed by the accusation in its objective aspects or subjective aspects would fit any variation considered valid by international law and jurisprudence with no difficulty. For instance, it would be included in Article 7 of the Rome Statute, other inhuman acts of similar characteristics causing intentionally great suffering or severe damage to one's body or mental and physical health. It is therefore necessary to consider its objective and subjective facts. These crimes took place in Bolsonaro's case. The objective facts, it is proved in the hearings that after a first scientific confusion moment that took place with the COVID-19 pandemic, the first months of 2020, scientists and the World Health Organization have let go of the politics connected to herd immunity, so-called herd immunity. Humanity had hundreds of years of expertise with the so-called Spanish flu, which led the world to lose almost 5% of its population when the world's population was half of what it is today. Under these conditions, Bolsonaro, opposite to the politics defended by the government of his own states, the interpreter apologizes. Mr. Raul is placing the text over his microphone and it can be difficult to listen. This has been broadly reproduced by several media outlets, national and international. At the same time, the president has questioned the efficacy of vaccines and has restated his trust in immunity that will be generated by the spread of the virus. He minimized the importance of the number of deaths. He has said that deaths happened only to people who already had other diseases, and many recommendations against scientific knowledge and advice. Not happy with all of that, the president allowed for the use of medication without scientific approval or efficacy. The efficacy of those medications had been disconsidered and their risks had been highlighted by the scientific community. He declared publicly that suppose clinical trials would have shown its efficacy for severe cases, and that was scientifically false, proven to be false. As a result of the uncommon health policy led by the federal government and defended publicly by the chief of the executive, several deaths happened which could have been avoided if the policies advised by the WHO and by the scientific community had been followed. Comparing the figures of Brazil with the figures of some countries that followed the shelter at home and vaccination policies, we can reach a figure that reports estimate to be around 100,000 deaths. Some deaths have escaped records in Brazil, maybe, and maybe the contrary might have happened in other countries. So it's difficult to compare precisely the number of deaths. In any case, what is proven beyond any doubt is that at least tens of thousands of deaths are involved, which is relevant for the legal qualification of Bolsonaro's and the government's conduct as a crime against humanity. When faced with crimes against humanity, genocide, people who deny this, they argue oftentimes that the exaggerated number of victims and speeches of this nature are known to genocide. And it's not surprising that this is repeated now. The disparity regarding the exact number of victims is not a defense one. We know there was mass deaths. There's no doubt that in this case, tens of thousands of human lives were extinguished as a result of the decision of this government led by Bolsonaro. So for legal qualification purposes, this has surpassed 100,000 deaths. The right to life of tens of thousands of citizens can be considered to be the result of decisions of the government. It is true that policies are decided by governments, and invariably any political decision benefits some and hinders others. But this is only admissible when the alternatives at play are reasonably discussed, which in this present case has not happened, considering that world scientific opinion has not legitimated Brazilian government's option. From the perspective of international law and human rights, and of any law that respects the dignity of individuals, it's unacceptable to use human beings as a means to reach other ends. The law is not at the service of any entity that transcends human beings, whether that's the state, a class, a community of people, or the economy. In this case, the economy was privileged. Considering the hierarchy of values at stake, we should not look at an allegation of a state of need once it is evident that the greatest evil was the one chosen, meaning the threat to human life and health.
O aspecto subjetivo da infração.
The subjective aspect of the aggression is to produce result. The accusation alleges that the act was committed with intention to disseminate the pandemic. This affirmation demands greater precision. The subjective aspect of the act as the reference of intention shows intention that we can perceive the core of subjectiveness of the violation committed. So mass death was committed with a willing to reach that result. So what we can say is negligence, where we're talking about being excluded, where nobody could ignore the lethal results of this political decision after the first point that is one that all of the healthcare organizations had already alerted all. So we know that this is not just a lack of care, but a result that was voluntary, specifically voluntary. So in terms of the crime against humanity, there was willingness to reach such results. That means it is irrelevant for this qualification purpose, the intention that goes beyond wanting to reach that specific result. The intention here was to privilege the economy, which is an intention that goes to the other side in terms of the results, and that was accepted and was carried on. And we can invert the analysis where it was to privilege the economy, undermining human life. So an intent of necessary consequences, since the lethal cost of the objective would reach everyone. But even with this approach, as the decision of making the economy to be favored, to be certain that the lethal result would be produced, since all science, knowledge, and scientists alerted to the inevitable production of such result, we cannot consider that such intent was accidental, but it was specific to it. So the intent of necessary actions for legal purposes is a direct intent. So what we cannot doubt is that the lethal result, mass result, was intentional with intent. There was clear intent to take on this objective of violation.
Vamos ver agora a possível coincidência
So
ideal.
now let's check the coincidence with genocide. What was said established that Jair Bolsonaro committed two illegal actions. One, a severe violation of human rights, inciting publicly the violation against major segments of the Brazilian population that suffer discrimination. Second, a crime against humanity, choosing a public health positive against the prevention, vaccination, social distancing, and brought the deaths of hundreds and millions of people. So ideally, the legal qualification of genocide must come together and coinciding with the second act. The accusation points to some severe omissions and possible contagious situations that could be in the marginal population, delaying vaccination, access to health care compared to the rest of the population. All data would indicate behavior of the authorities that could be seen as within the concept of genocide. When it comes to the Black population in Brazil, which has been reported is a higher death rate than to the rest of the population, according to many studies mentioned. There are two different situations, although in both cases, we can see a greater death rate due to the pandemic in both human groups. Any action that violates the human rights, international rights, when it comes to a political, social, cultural context, must be evaluated accordingly. The data that we have and cannot be inevitable are intrinsic. The social economic characteristic of Brazilian society that has a high level of social stratification and also concentration of wealth. On the other hand, it is well known that during many years, racism was denied in the official speeches of federal government administration. So it was cultivated historically that claims a previous courteous existence of people with ethnic differences. It is currently being revisited with high criticism from intellectuals and sociologists in Brazil. It's undeniable that racism is evident in the social life in many aspects, as the selectiveness with a predominance of Black and mixed individuals with a prevalence of the one with low melanin levels when it comes to the college life and other social realms. So the selectiveness in terms of education access made the previous governments take affirmative actions. When it comes to the native populations, the original populations was to recover through a report made by the International Affairs Office in 2007, when it was drafted by the district attorney, Correa, and that should have been destroyed during a fire, but it was actually hidden by the dictatorship regime at the time. So this report shows the aberrations that were committed from the 40s all the way to the 60s last century against Brazil's indigenous populations by the owners of lands and the services of indigenous protections led by the government. The report describes murders, tortures, sexual abuse, and even bacterial attacks, as many populations were extinct. So negligence and the aggression suffered by the appropriation of land that has been going for decades, specifically during the dictatorship of 1964, is far from being something new. It is an old government decision with a policy of extinction of full dissemination. So many that was practiced until mid last century, when it was the case of Australia and others. The data now furnished by the accusation and well known by the affirmation to maintain such policy with a specific characteristic that was made worse through the current government administration. Within such context, we can see that the greatest mortality in both human groups when it comes to genocide, specifically with the indigenous population, does not correspond to the general rule that in any society, the most vulnerable suffer more catastrophes. But going even beyond what the general law already shows, a society with high social stratification, some actions and omissions and negligence from the federal government also would have an impact. So it would be important, therefore, to specify, maybe not with accuracy, but close to that, the effect of the criminal sanitation policy chosen by these groups without taking into consideration the effect that it would bring about from its historical position and subordinates and vulnerability. socially of this population. So the numbers make it clear, but although the Bolsonaro administration knew these groups would be the most affected subjectively, it would be also important to prove that by adopting this healthcare policy would be a crime against humanity as proved. And it comes together with a subjective particular element of intent of destroying or harm these groups and these segments of our population. In this case, and according to the genocide legal terms, to bring results is not enough. It should come together with subjective element of having intent of genocide targeting these specific groups. Unless the proof of this intent can be reduced from the results, as we have with many cases, the particularity of this present situation would demand proof of this subjective element of pure intent or voluntary intent to produce such result. We must say that this tribunal is cautious when it comes to the qualification of genocide to avoid a banalization of such and a second legal devaluation in terms of ideal results. So that wouldn't really bring any extra results in terms of its effects of crime against humanity, as it has already been appointed and was fully proven in terms of its policy of healthcare facing the pandemic in 2020. So all of this has been enough to establish that there is undoubtedly criminal offense, so the tribunal should be highly cautious with these specific cases to ensure a rush requalification could bring loopholes, arguments, discussions, and doubts about the strictness of the previous conclusions. Therefore, with the present case and with no harm that information or future clarity can show the other way, it is important to talk about the requalification, at least when it comes to its legal terms. Despite what has already been mentioned, the tribunal cannot go without mentioning the fact that sociologically and ethically, that is, goes beyond the strict legal terms, especially when it comes to the indigenous populations, there are serious traces that the Brazilian federal government is most likely committing a type of genocide as a continuous crime practice, baby steps at a time, and that should be seriously investigated, analyzed, evaluated with more information by the competent political organizations when it comes to universal human rights of the United Nations and by the jurisdictional American realms. So that way, the tribunal sees that it is appropriate due to the continuity of the political of this prophecy to take this to the ICC, to bring this to the higher appropriate court, the possible nature of genocide of its conduct. The same way, the tribunal cannot go without mentioning all the social gaps that was brought about because of the strong focus of wealth in Brazilian society and racist discrimination manifested in many aspects of its social life. We recommend then a change in the political policy brought by Bolsonaro and the retrocess brought by its administration, a progressive action from here on, and also positive and adequate policies to fight discrimination. As a result, the terms show us that the PPT, due to all its evidence evaluated and is of public domain, it is important to evaluate and to say that the conduct of Jair Messias Bolsonaro consisted in maliciously carrying out the death of hundreds and thousands of people due to its decision taken as the leader of the Federal Republic and rejecting the policy of social distancing, vaccination to face the pandemic is a crime against humanity. And inciting permanently violent and encouraging publicly discrimination continuously that adhere many of the Brazilian population is a threat to these parts of the population that reduce their social space, constituting a severe violation of human rights. The Permanent People's Tribunal also recommends that the United Nations Agency of Human Rights and of the American states take into consideration the treatment of its indigenous population of Brazil, take into consideration a possible crime of genocide being made forward continuously over time. The level of respect of human rights, culturally, environmentally, when it comes to discrimination suffered by its Black and mixed population. So the Permanent People's Tribunal also recommends to take the case of how this has been treated by the federal government to the International Criminal Court, the ICC, for the discussion appropriately, making it clear if necessary or qualifying such policy that has been ongoing. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Bueno, le agradezco muchísimo a Raúl Zaffaroni para la lectura.
Thank you, Mr. Zaffaroni, for reading this text. As a People's Tribunal, we have decided to trust Mr. Ferraioli, the president of the session, to make a first comment after reading this verdict so that we have a general idea of everything that happened. After Mr. Ferraioli, if other members of the panel of judges would like to add anything to these observations or comments that have been already sent, please let us know. And we have some minutes for other comments. And now we give...
I am sorry, I was supposed to speak in English. However, it's now the time for Luigi Ferraioli to present the commentary on the verdict and the implication of the verdict of the Permanent People's Tribunal in order to give a broader understanding of the context and of the implication. Thanks. Grazie, Luigi.
Molte grazie. Muy obrigado. Mi scuso del fatto di dover parlare in italiano. Poche parole di commento.
I will be speaking Italian, and I would say just a couple of comments regarding this sentence, this verdict. After Mr. Gasparoni's extensive presentation, there is an aspect of the sentence that I would like to mention. Most decisions from the PPT, there have been over 60 sentences in many decades. We have always been dedicated to criminal phenomena. Regarding the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, the conquer of America and the birth of international law, the violations of children's rights, the violation of workers' rights, global warming. So criminal phenomenon that cannot be attributed to individual responsibility of specific leaders, but certainly there's the political responsibility of governments, crimes of the system that cannot be criminally punished. In this case, however, we have a verdict specifically for this session regarding the personal criminal responsibility of a head of state. The criminal responsibility for a very serious crime against humanity, which happened through a very serious violation of human rights, having led to the death of tens of thousands of people, with an insensitive response coming from President Bolsonaro regarding the pandemic, in contrast with all scientific evidence coming from scientists all around the world and the WHO that prescribed prevention measures such as social distancing, shelter-at-home measures, protection, and vaccination. And quite the opposite here, we are in the face of a policy that was on purpose designed and clearly designed to deny, to minimize the pandemic, comparing it to a regular flu. And that led to the death of tens of thousands of people. According to a calculation, 100,000 people could be alive today should we have had protection measures when compared to other countries that have adopted these prevention measures. Maybe this is an excessive figure. This could be smaller. The figure could be smaller. But in any case, we are speaking of tens of thousands of deaths caused by a policy that was adopted on purpose and with awareness of its results. This conduct has been explained by Mr. Zaffaroni, and it corresponds to crimes against humanity established in Article 7, paragraph 1 of the Rome Statute, which establishes this type of behavior or crime that can cause great damage to people's health or identities. And in this case, we're speaking of tens of thousands of people. The numbers are relevant. As Mr. Zaffaroni said, in this crime, we have objective elements and subjective elements to this crime. Regarding the objective elements, there is no question. President Bolsonaro has always minimized, and he even said literally that COVID was irrelevant. He even recommended a treatment with unproven medication, chloroquine, supporting it, saying that he had to support the economy. And so he was saying that the economy was more important than people's lives. So this is also an unequivocal sign of the subjective element of the crime. The fact that intentionally he has prioritized the economy over the lives of thousands of people. This is an unmistakable sign of his desire. The contamination and the deaths of tens of thousands of people has reached, above all, the indigenous population and the Black population. And this is a symptom of the racism involved in these policies. As Mr. Zaffaroni mentioned, we did not consider the crime of genocide because of a lack of a specific intention towards genocide. However, this result is a living symptom of the racist, classist, characteristic, homophobic, sexist characteristic of the policy led. So there's this additional dimension connected to human rights, and this is an additional crime. And racism, we have to remember that in the last, this is a racist culture that dehumanizes the indigenous population and the Black population of the country. And this was inaugurated by a genocide that is in the roots of modern times. So the genocide of the indigenous population in the American continent, who were exterminated. We have Todorov's book right after the conquest. I would also like to mention an important aspect in this sentence. And I repeat, this is one of the few sentences or verdicts talking about the individual responsibility of a head of state. We qualify as crimes against humanity, very damaging to the rights of the peoples, connected to the health policies and the lack of prevention against the contamination caused by the pandemic. This has led to the death of tens of thousands of people as a clearly foreseeable impact, and therefore a desired impact. That means that this verdict leads to a personal response of crimes against humanity, not just from Bolsonaro, but from all other parties of government that have openly promoted these policies. It's not just simple political responsibility. This is actual criminal responsibility. And this verdict has the merit of highlighting the responsibility of these government leaders. International law needs to give a quality leap and identify as criminal responsibility the policies that can be attributed to individuals and that are targeted at producing massive violations of human rights. This is important because minimization policies of the dangers represented by the pandemic, and therefore the policies to promote contamination, this was not conducted just by President Bolsonaro, but by many other populist leaders who grew in the continent. May this verdict lead into a reflection about all these crimes, and may it lead to more responsible politics or policies. This verdict should have a general impact. It is valid to highlight the criminal characteristic of all actions stemming from government leaders and their criminal responsibility. So not just regarding health policies who are homicidal and which allowed for mass contamination of tens of thousands of people, but in general terms, to all policies that damage human rights. This verdict is about political responsibility that led to tens of thousands of deaths through contamination, but it's also valid to other massive violations and breaches of human rights. And I'm thinking about the lack of help, the kidnapping of people when harbors are closed, or naval blockages. And this has to, in my country, for instance, we have candidates that defend homicidal policies against migrant populations that have turned the Mediterranean Sea into a cemetery and that have led to the death of people. These are crimes. We have to give them the right name. We have to show the seriousness of those behaviors, and we have to name them correctly. Those are crimes against humanity, and the criminal responsibility lies in the hands of governments. And this should be used to fight for human rights. So this verdict has a historical merit. Thank you, Mr. Ferraioli, for such an important comment, opening also this aspect connected to the future.
The members of the panel of judges, if there is any further comment, I know that some of them, Verlene, others had some reaction, and so you have the opportunity, if you like, to take some minutes in order to further comment your reaction to this verdict. If there are, you could just raise hands. Otherwise, we are not obliged. But because if you find that what Zaffaroni and Ferraioli have said, this is fine. Yes, I think that Kennedy.
Vou falar rapidamente, Gianni.
Sim.
I'm going to be brief. I didn't intend to speak at first. Can you all hear me? I initially did not intend to make any comments. And we've heard Mr. Zaffaroni and Ferraioli, but just a brief comment about the importance of the conclusion the tribunal came to, precisely regarding the political decision that was in the hands of President Bolsonaro. The author, the fact that we see an author, which is currently the president, and that has led to death as a desire through the policies implemented by him. It makes clear what is the perspective within our country, the acknowledgement of the political decision and of its connection with the total number of deaths that we've had so far, almost 700,000 of people. This just shows the severity of the acts, and these acts go beyond the desires of the people and the need for condemnation by different international and regional organisms. Beyond what we are doing today, there is the need to take this ahead. What has been said regarding indigenous population and the Black populations of Brazil, so that everyone is aware of the crimes that we looked into. These are crimes of the greatest possible severity, crimes against humanity and all other crimes that are foreseen in the ICC's statute. They can lead to life sentences. So this just shows how the severity of what we see here with the PPT is so important, this verdict. And I hope that the accountability goes on in other spheres as well. So I would just like to commend everyone, and I would like to pay tribute to Brazilian victims as well. And now I give you the floor back, Mr. Gianni. Mr. Tognoni, you are on mute. If you can please open your microphone.
A sessão
But can you hear me? Okay, so I think that if there is nobody else, I think that we could really close this session of the tribunal. As it happens for all the verdicts of the tribunal, the fact of having a verdict is not a conclusion only of a very important work of in-depth analysis, but is the way of transferring what has been presented, decided, recommended to the real protagonists of these crimes against humanity, who are the communities who have been really affected so heavily by the presence and the absence of their politician. And I think that it would be very important to work on the text which are being put into disposition. The act of accusation is certainly complementary to for the documentation to what has been presented here. And we do hope, Tribunal, that to be able to organize some comments in the future. What has been said by Luigi Ferraioli is in fact opening really a path of development, and what has been recommended also for the International Criminal Court could be really an innovation in the sense. I think I take the opportunity for thanking all those who have taken part to the preparation. It has been a very intensive work, not so easy to work from remote, but at the end, and I obviously thanks very, very particularly to Raul Zaffaroni and Ferraioli. I think that something could be really better developed for the future also from the point of view of epidemiology and public health. Alejandro Macchia had prepared some material in this sense. So we have much material on which to work and to use that for didactical purpose with the community. Thanks for everything, and thanks for the promoters of the organization.
There is applause from the in-person audience.
Convidar a Heloísa Machado para.
I would like to invite Ms. Heloísa Machado, please. And I would also like to make two comments. First, this verdict will be distributed, made available by the 4 entities. And Analytica, the PR agency, will distribute the verdict to journalists as well. Just request to our PR department, Analytica. They will give you access to the sentence. I would also like to say that some colleagues are here present. From the Comissão Justiça e Paz, we have Marcelo Zelic. From the Vladimir Herzog Institute, we have Rafael Cabiol. From the Union of Lawyers of São Paulo, Mr. Rocha. We have also Catholics for the Right to Decide, Ms. Letícia Rocha. The Fernando Henrique Cardoso Foundation, Mr. Otávio Dias. The Bar Association of São Paulo with Mrs. Patrícia Vanzolini, President. Mr. Flavio Strauss, the National Confederation of Health Workers, Ms. Lucimere Santo, the Pastoral with Jessica Santos, the Alternative Indigenous Association with Mr. Awakwari. And I would also like to state that we have the honor of having with us the former judge of the ICC, our dear colleague Sylvia Steiner is here present this morning.
Estou terminando, eu queria registrar a
And now I would also like to mention that we have here the founding members of Comissão Arnes, Luiz Carlos Bresser Pereira, our Executive Director, Laura Greenhalgh, Maria Victoria Benevides, she's also here with us. Fábio Comparato, Manuela Carneiro da Cunha. Ms. Genevois, who's also here with us.
É sempre bom aplaudir de novo a Margarida.
It's always great to give a hand to Margarita again.
Vou falar. Outros membros fundadores aqui estão.
Other founding members here. Zaire Santos Jr. Paulo Ranucci.
E José Luiz Del Roy.
And José Luiz Del Roy.
Estão também aqui outros membros da comissão.
And there are other members of the Arns Commission that worked hard to be able to hold the preliminary session in today's session. So our executive director and founding member, Laura Greenhall, and Andrea Contra, who's the executive secretary. Silvia Menezes. And Liana Myra.
E uma presença extraordinária, eu só vou.
And the extraordinary presence of Daniela Mercury. She's here with us, sitting right here in the front row. A major singer from the northeast of the country that held and came out as gay and holds the LGBTQI flag. Okay, so I shall pass the floor now to Eloisa to organize the session. I'm sure you'll be more organized than I was, and I'll just now sit and watch. So thank you, everyone. Thank you for the opening of this session. Everyone present here with me. Raquel Dodge, who gave us the honor of being here, and my colleague, Celso Campilongo. Thank you very much, Professor Paulo Sergio. I shall mention another member of the Arns Commission, Joana Dimbenstein. Good morning, everyone. Oh, Juliana Santos, still there.
Pronto, Dani. Io sto altri 5 minuti.
Outro membro depois da Heloísa começar.
Ancora 5 minuti.
Bom dia a todas.
Good morning, everyone. It is a great relief to talk to you after a specific sentence that recognized Bolsonaro as an international criminal, but not only an international criminal, but one of the most severe crimes that someone can commit against humanity. So I am here talking to you, feeling relieved, but also very much willing to take forward all the claims, not only now being recognized by our specific Permanent People's Tribunal, but also in the Brazilian jurisdiction, international ones that have been overly cautious and overly shielding all the crimes that have been committed by Jair Bolsonaro. The Comissão Arns, a PIB, the Coalizão Negros por Direito, and the Public Services International have brought Bolsonaro to the defendant's seat to bring him to the responsibility of the crimes that killed hundreds and thousands of people, specifically the Black population, the indigenous population, and also with a hard impact on all healthcare professionals that worked and are still working in COVID care.
o tribunal confrontado com
The
provas,
tribunal with research, with proof, and all given by the commission, and all after the committee's investigation of the Congress concluded that Jair Bolsonaro, while president of the Brazil Federation, exercising his role as president and leading all public policies for federal healthcare, committed severe violation of human rights, fostering a hate discrimination against the Black population, against women, against the LGBTQIA+ groups, the indigenous population, against all of those who are different to him. So the tribunal, recognizing even that we didn't even request that there is an ongoing violation of human rights for discrimination and inciting violence against these groups. The tribunal also recognized that to ignore science, that to foster the intentional contamination of the population, to make access to vaccine hard, and all the other measures of boycott that could have stopped the propagation of the pandemic in Brazil, that this is a crime against humanity. As it is, it brings a personal responsibility of Bolsonaro, not a disseminated one, but him as leading the Brazilian public policies as the president of the Brazilian Federation, transformed our country, one that incites hate and death. And that way, at a personal level, he was made responsible by the Permanent People's Tribunal. The tribunal not only recognized crime against humanity, but also pointed to traces of the way that the pandemic was conducted when it comes to the Black population and the indigenous population, a possible genocide crime, and that this shall be investigated by the International Criminal Court. The Permanent People's Tribunal requested our organizations to take this to the ICC. It has already been taken. It is already being evaluated by their Attorney General, and we are sure that there will be a full investigation other than crimes against humanity, but also for genocide when it comes to the indigenous population. And lastly, before
vai chegar. Esse dia vai chegar.
that day will get here to us, and we will be able to have another session like this to recall that this whole story started here with a reading of the sentence of the Permanent People Tribunal. And lastly, before passing the floor to the best lawyers that I could have had, Sheila Carvalho's, Marisa Tenera, and I have great admiration to them, and they will have space to speak. I will like to say that this decision, although it comes from an opinion tribunal, still is the only one we have to show the responsibility of Jair Bolsonaro for all that took place. And at the same time, this decision of today reveals the incapacity of our judicial system to this point of challenging or facing what Jair Bolsonaro brought to our democracy and our constitutional order. We expect that the sentence of the Permanent People's Tribunal can be an inspiration to our national judicial system so they can do the work that should be done to investigate crimes, repair the victims, and bring responsibility for the one who should be made responsible. Professor Paulo Sérgio, for now, this is the only sentence, but I shall close saying that it will not be the only one. It is just the first one. Thank you very much.
Bom dia.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. I'm Sheila Carvalho. political director of the Peregu organization, director of the Coalizão Negra. And I am really happy to say that we led this together, Mauricio Tenera and Professor Luiz Machado, and the result we see in this historical day today at the Law School of University of São Paulo. I should greet all the judges, the panel here with us, and it has been made clear to all who is present that what is at the core of this discussion here is an irreparable damage. We're talking about lives that cannot be brought back. They were taken away from us. Nothing that we can do here will bring these people back, that will repair the pain that they left behind. But we're here because we need to be sure there's justice for everything that was taken from us. I'll bring a brief history of what brought us here, of some of the main statements made from him, and with his criminal administration, and how the crime against humanity was judged here by the Permanent People's Tribunal. What was he saying during the pandemic while we're fighting to survive? Many of those who say that is a fantasy, this is not a crisis. What is wrong is being hysterical, as if it's the end of the world. A nation like Brazil will only be free when a certain number of people is infected and build antibodies. After being stabbed, not any flu will take me down. The population has been fooled all this time about the virus. Some will die. What can I say? I feel for them. That's how life is. You can't just stop a car factory because people die every day on the highway. Everybody will die one day. Nobody will take away my right of coming and going. We cannot be a coward with this virus in front of us. The states have been bankrupt. There is no space for those who are being very radical. I'm not tomb digger, and I will just keep doing my barbecue. So what? So what is what I ask you? And I ask the democratic institutions that have the duty to work so that we have the specific actions to take against that who was the president during the pandemic. So how many claims weren't taken forward against the federal government, made by us, Coalizão Negra por Direitos, so many also made through Heloísa Machado, and also through a PIB by Mauricio Tenera. How many of these have been taken forward? I mean, more than 70 requests for impeachments that were ignored by Rodrigo Maia, Congressman, Speaker of the House at the time, and also Arthur Lira, Speaker of the House, while people died. So there was no conflict against life and economy because Bolsonaro couldn't save either. During the pandemic, he brought the despair of hunger back home, back to our families. When I was here in the hearing session that brought this sentence, I recall Thiago Marcelina, activist União Afro-Brazil of the Coalizão Negra por Direitos, that he was at the front line with the campaign, people with hunger, feeling hungry. I mean, we had to go out to deliver that to people because our families and our communities had nothing to eat. Don't tell me that he tried to save the economy. Thiago passed away after the vaccine was already available. It was the death that was avoidable, as the one brought by Jurema Werneck's report during the hearing. So we're talking about avoidable deaths, avoidable pain. We're talking about policies that were put forth by the president that brought us despair, hunger, and pain. That is what was recognized by the Permanent People's Tribunal today. From our side, as a Black movement organized, we will carry on fighting to report at all levels the genocide practiced by Bolsonaro against the Black populations, the crimes against humanity that he is responsible for the whole Brazilian population. That will not go without bringing forth justice. Tiago must be present always.
Bom dia a todos e a todas.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Mauricio Terena from the Articulation of Indigenous Peoples of Brazil. I am very emotional right now. Just 1 week before we quote unquote celebrate our independence, our government is bringing the heart, the actual heart of a colonizer to this country. We are condemning Jair Bolsonaro. We are hearing the first verdict condemning the president of the republic. We have a Black woman. We have a professor of constitutional law who is committed to social causes, and we have an indigenous person here. And today, Brazil is watching a verdict which condemns the president. As I was listening to the reading of the verdict, it seems a contradiction to say that the health policy was led or managed as to reach an impact. The health policy was used to cause death. That was the policy. This is no health policy. This is no health policy. We need to name this. We need to say these words. This was a death policy. This was a policy in which my Terena land, we faced the death of 10 people a week, and Medicals Without Borders were forbidden to come into our territory from the government. Just look at the point we've come. This was a death policy that was used. We were desperate, the Articulation of Indigenous Peoples of Brazil, when we saw the Brazilian institutions paralyzed in the face of this death policy. We resorted to the Brazilian Federal Court, Supreme Court. And what if we didn't have indigenous lawyers? What if we didn't have these organizations? What if we didn't have these leaders fighting for life every day with or without the pandemic? Our country does not acknowledge us. We are not acknowledged. Our bodies are made to die in our country. Our bodies are not valued with or without the pandemic. The everyday lives of indigenous peoples is suffering in this country. We fight every single day, and we have fought to be here. We have fought to have indigenous people now fighting for spaces of power, because that's the logic that we have in Brazil, which is to kill indigenous people, and that is very clear to us. We do believe there were crimes against humanity, and our president has to pay for these crimes. And I have the commitment of leaving a question here today. When will someone be condemned for genocide? We all know that indigenous peoples are suffering historical genocide in this country. So I have this commitment to my people to ask this question. Yes, there was genocide. Yes, there was the intention to kill us. Yes, there was a distribution of unproven scientific medication through health departments. Those medications were distributed to our communities. There was an incentive to invade our lands by wildcat miners. Our women died. Just last week, I was in our land, and we just didn't have essential medication against fever. During the pandemic, this scenario repeated. It is really sad to see that our lives are worth nothing. The lives of the Black population are worth nothing. But please, if you can shake our instruments, this is the sound. We are coming. We are coming. Please, if you can play the indigenous instrument. And we will leave this room today, as Ms. Eloisa said, the articulation of indigenous peoples and our partner organizations. We will leave this room today and we are going to The Hague. We are in The Hague. Our claim is there. There was genocide. Yes, and we want our lands to be demarcated and protected now. There is a standing ovation from the in-person audience.
Muito bem. A Heloísa acabou de passar a palavra.
Eloisa Machado gave me the floor now, and I would like to invite Ms. Rosângela Silva, who is representing AVICO, which is the acronym in Portuguese for the Association of Victims and Family Members of the COVID. You have 5 minutes, please, and thank you very much for being here with us this morning.
Bom dia.
Good morning. My name is Rosângela, and I am representing AVICO, which is the Association of Victims and Family Members or Victims of COVID-19. AVICO was founded in April 2021. I would like to read some statements here, some sentences coming from our president, the President of the Republic. And she quotes, "We are concerned, but this is no alarming situation." January 26, 2020. That's the first public comment about COVID-19. Then he said, "What is at stake? This is a political dispute coming from these people. I am alone in a corner and I'm taking hits from all sides. The press, most of the press, many state governors and many legislators from the lower and higher houses, they are hitting me. This is a struggle for power." That was March 16, 2020. On that same date in São Paulo, there was the decree for the pandemic. Hospitals were shut down. We could not pay visit to people in hospital. And at the time, we had very little knowledge. We are sorry for the deaths. This is reaching 100,000. But let's just go on with life. And let's get away from this problem. He said that in August 6, 2020. And I would like to say here, on behalf of the victims and the family members of victims of COVID-19. This is a historical day we're seeing this morning. This president did nothing of good for the Brazilian population. He didn't do any good for the economy, much less for the lives of Brazilians. Why am I saying this? I am the victim because I was contaminated and I have side effects until today. I lost my father for this disease. And as a health worker for the public health system in the city of São Paulo, I worked in a hospital that treated COVID in the outskirts of São Paulo. Mr. President, you were terrible to care for the economy of Brazil, and you are a terrible human being when it comes to the human lives of Brazilian citizens. I cannot even name what you do. You are a bad person. You do not deserve the chair you occupy. You tried, but you are not even going to be able to take from Brazilians what we have that is most important for us, which is our life. You tried to kill, and you killed, and you have killed. You have taken 700,000 Brazilians' lives from us. 700,000 empty seats in living rooms, in the kitchens, in the houses of our brothers and sisters. They are our brothers and sisters. It doesn't matter who they are, where they were. The indigenous people, the Black population in the outskirts of São Paulo, and that's where I come from. I come from the outskirts of São Paulo, and I've seen the suffering of everyone there. We have to talk about the orphans of COVID-19. We've lost our fathers, our mothers, our grandfathers, grandmothers, and we have a number. We don't even know what this number is because the government does not give us statistics. They don't want to give us statistics, and we don't know the right figure of victims. You might have the report, but there are also the unknown victims. So today is representing the hope. Myself as representative of Avico, I have the hope that I will also hear a verdict where Bolsonaro is named as a genocide. That's what he is. I cannot see another name. When the verdict was being read, Mr. Zaffaroni used the term genocide in from a sociological perspective, not from a legal perspective. So the term genocide was used from a sociological perspective. I am a sociologist myself, and I can say, yes, he is a genocide. There is no other name. And you will be held accountable in The Hague as well. Thank you very much. It's not easy to speak. I'm speaking about loved ones. I'm speaking of people we lost. I'm speaking of families that I have treated as a health worker, and I've seen many families cry for their loved ones, and many families have lost more than one person. I'm being taken away by my emotions right now. But I want to thank everyone for inviting me. And yes, we are here. We are here to fight this fight. The rule of law is threatened every day by this man. But with the audience we have here today, we know he will not be successful. This does not belong to him. It does not belong to Jair Messias Bolsonaro. Thank you very much.
Muito obrigado, Rosângela Silva.
Thank you very much, Rosângela, for representing Avico. Now we have the honor of giving the floor to Senator Humberto Costa. He played an important role in the Senate's investigation committee for the COVID-19. He has accepted to join us for a couple of minutes this morning. Mr. Senator, can you hear us? Yes, I can hear you. Good morning, Mr. Paulo Sérgio Pinheiro. Good morning to all of you in this very important event that is taking place today. I've heard you read the verdict, and this is a historical moment. It's a moment for atonement, for reparation, and it will certainly contribute to make justice. What the investigative committee from the Senate has investigated is extensively documented. The evidence is clear, and everyone saw what happened. However, highlighting some comments that have already been said, the Brazilian legal system so far has not given a concrete response to everything that happened, more specifically to the evidence produced by the investigative committee. So for those of us who worked in this committee, and we have this verdict coming from such a respectable body of judges, it's an opinion tribunal, I know, but everyone who is part of this panel, these are very respected professionals, people for their areas of expertise and their legal knowledge. And therefore, for us, this just reinforces the work we did in this investigation committee. But the most important is that this verdict has a power, a moral power that is very large. It is unacceptable that the Attorney General's office in Brazil so far has been absolutely silent in denouncing the President of the Republic, in leading to an additional investigation where this is necessary, when this is necessary. So I think that Bolsonaro is being condemned by crimes against humanity, and the Attorney General's office is being condemned as well due to its complete lack of action. And they can be seen as accomplices. They don't even accept an additional investigation involving organizations that should be doing this work. So I just wanted to say that we feel rewarded by the words we've heard here today. I believe Senator Randolph Rodrigues is here this morning as well, and I believe he shares this knowledge, and all the colleagues who were part of this investigation. This is also a response. It's an answer from civil society and from the world to a person who is a criminal, who is leading Brazil into a health tragedy, a political tragedy, economic and social tragedy. Congratulations, and thank you very much.
Senador Randolph Rodrigues.
Senator Randolfo Rodrigues is not on, so I shall then, well, if he does come on, we'll pass the floor to him. So at this point, I'd like to invite Copenaua Yanomami to take the floor, please.
Oi, na boa maku.
Hello.
Kami uri teri aku daena ya hoi hudio ya pihi toblalu yalo
The speaker is making use of indigenous language. Good afternoon, everyone. I greet all the authorities and our audience. I am very glad to be present here in this important moment, historical one, but on the other hand, one that shows us great concern. And us as people from the forest, we have been suffering for many years. As a representative of the Yanomami people in the north of our country, 30,000 Yanomami and Ikinoana in Brazil, and also 9 million hectares of the Yanomami Ikinoana territory in Brazil. So I'd like to talk about the importance for us as indigenous population and the partners of APIB with such an important work. To have Brazil's judicial system recognize us, we have been suffering discrimination, has been for many years now. It is very important to have the Brazilian society recognize we have been undergoing a process of suffering for a long time now. And in this debate, it was important to include and recognize that we are being discriminated, we have been murdered, and this has been going on for years and years. And as Yanomami people from the forest people, I am a witness, an important story to tell Brazilian society. And I must say that I lost 20 people from my Yanomami community, a 15-year-old Yanomami that passed away from COVID-19. In the state of Roraima, there was no medication, no responsibility of the Brazilian federal administration to take care of this 15-year-old young man that passed away. This is very much of a concern as a representative of the Yanomami people. This is my right to speak out. And I should also speak out to say, as the president of Brazil, he will have to pay for it. The lives of the Brazilian people, specifically the indigenous population, and also our society. That means that he must pay for it. So it's important to mention this as a representative of the Yanomami people who live in the villages, and I use my own Yanomami language. I live in my land. More and more 20,000 wildcat miners come and destroy Mother Nature, raping 5-year-old children. It is outrageous what I'm saying. This is all crime, and who will be responsible for it? Brazilian government, as Bolsonaro, as we say in Yanomami language, Shawara. Shawara means Bolsonaro is a criminal that kills children, people, humanity. And as leaders, we say Shawara nowadays. So it's very important that today our right is recognized in the Brazilian judicial system. So that's what I wanted to say. But as indigenous population, we must keep reporting why the authorities behind the table, I mean, we will need to say that over and over again. Let's get rid of the wildcat mining. Thank you.
Eu queria agradecer muito a intervenção
I'd
da
like to thank much the intervention of Dario Kopenawa Yanomami, and I would like him to have Davi Kopenawa also receive our hand of applause to him as well, please. And if Dario allows me, I should also remind us of a friend of Davi, Senator Severo Gomes, that also is responsible for protecting the Yanomami land. So I will ask to come now to our panel. First, Shirley Marshall. So please.
O Dr. Edio Silva, representante
Mr. Edio Silva of the Edio Silva from Coalizão Negra. And Edio is a great friend of the Arns Commission, other than all his credentials. Hello, Edio. Please take a seat.
E também o amigo Douglas.
And also, Belchior, please.
Tem uma cadeira ali ao lado? Tem.
Please, let's have a seat for him. One more. And I'd like to also invite Sonia Guajajara, who will be speaking on behalf of APIB.
Então, eu vou começar pela ordem que está aqui.
So I will start by my order here. So how much time each has? 5? And Lara will be controlling this. So first of all, Shirley Marçal, please take the floor, and thank you for being here with us. Good morning, everyone. It is a great pleasure to be here. Very excited to be here as a woman from the Andes population, nurse, president of the Nurse Union, and here speaking on behalf of the Public Services International. So I'd like to break the protocol and ask all the healthcare professionals or representatives of the healthcare professionals, please stand up. I'd like to ask all those who had their family or friends being attended by these professionals, please take a seat, stand up as well.
Todo mundo. Muito obrigada, podem sentar.
Please, back to your seats. Our representation here today is one that represents millions of workers that dedicated their lives during the pandemic and trying to go against the flow, although the federal administration was irresponsible, and also the president that still takes the higher seat as chief of our president in terms of healthcare policy. So we are here and we're back because we were also in the hearing session as one of the witnesses, together with our partners Benedito Augusto, president of the Confederation of the Healthcare or the Social Security Workers, Valdir Castanha, president of the National Confederation of the Healthcare Professionals, that delegated the responsibility to me to be here representing all of us. Denise Mota Down, our subsecretary of the Public Services International. Let's give her a hand for being so brave as she brought forth the claim, and the Arns Commission, to our chairman and our dear lawyer. Eloisa, you are brave, such a warrior. And we should extend then that to the Coalizão Negra, PB, to be brave enough to take forth this claim. And we are here again today. The first day we were here, it was said that the law school of the University of São Paulo here in the São Francisco Square would not shy away from fighting against the dictatorship as we did before. So we're here fighting against the fascism that we have in our country, the deaths that we saw during the pandemic. They were all predicted. It is obvious that the president of the country knew that to have healthcare professionals facing a virus that nobody knew about, that we had no vaccines against, that we had no mitigation against at the time. Today I'm here wearing my apron, my mask, to represent our individual protection equipment, all our overalls, caps, all of that was not available for some professionals at the time. They faced the virus of COVID-19 with their own bodies. And today, as the VICO representative well said, there are open seats in the homes of these workers. We chose to defend life while there was a government administration that wanted to defend death. Clearly, death of the Black population, of the indigenous population, because these victims need to have their voices heard, because these representatives that are here today are speaking on behalf of all the lives lost, of the voices that can't speak no more, and of those who survived to tell their story, because today we must thank this Permanent People's Tribunal for having brought some feeling to us. First of all, justice. Martin Luther King Jr. had said that while there is injustice in any place, there will be threat, constant threat, that the injustice will be all over. Justice can't be wholesome until there is place of injustice. And today we took the first step forward, because it will be the first of many condemnations of the genocide that we saw in our country, because our country that was a role model in public health system with our vaccination program recognized internationally nearly couldn't work because of the attack suffered by the President Jair Bolsonaro. And the trust of this tribunal in our words as witnesses, with the evidence that the lawyers brought amazingly to defend the claim, and the hope that better days were to come, and that deaths will not be silenced, and that the rapes of these girls, that the deaths of these Black boys, of these indigenous girls will not go without being mentioned, that the effort of healthcare professionals that fought hard to defend the life of each one of us in all the different sectors, while everyone was sitting at home, we had to go to a war scene many times, being judged where people did not want us to go on the bus. They didn't want to be around people that had a white jacket. It was a potential contamination of a virus that everybody was afraid of. We did not have rights to a salary, to a condition of work. They tried to kill us, but we resisted for the health of our country, to defend life, even within our deaths, we were not respected. And we didn't even have masks, right? We didn't even have masks to face it. There was a law for the indemnity of healthcare professionals that passed away with COVID and their families that lost their loved ones. And still, during our deaths, Jair Messias Bolsonaro filed a lawsuit at the Supreme Court so that we could not have access even during our death, and not even for the orphans of COVID. And it's on behalf of them we are here today, because our white jackets, our protection equipment saved people. It's to pay tribute to all those who fought to keep having life in our country. And this brings to us a hope of having genocide criminally, because sociologically has been already proved by our juries here that it is genocide. So we can say that it must be paid so that no authoritarian government can go beyond its own population. So this is threat everywhere. So tomorrow it will be another day. Thank you very much for bringing hope.
Muito obrigado, Shirley Marshall, por essa
Thank you very much, Mrs. Marshall, for being here with us and for your words. I now give the floor to Mr. Edio Silva. As I mentioned, he's a dear friend of us at Comissão Arns, and he has many other accolades and expertises, but we all know him.
Bom dia. Bom dia.
Good morning, and thank you. Good morning once again. Good morning. Okay, good morning. This is a very important day. It's a very important day when we've heard this very important verdict that brings us back hope and the meaning of resisting. I would like to make personal tribute to a very important icon in the fight for democracy and human rights in Brazil. I worked on construction sites until I was 15 years of age, and I want to pay tribute to Mr. Comparato. I would read the Folha de São Paulo newspaper. I would work at a construction site as a contractor, and I would read the newspaper in my breaks. And there was a very smart and acute columnist. He also had humor, and he was very precise in his words. And I started admiring what he wrote. And who could say that one day I would be sitting down at the same table with that same person who became a UN rapporteur, a diplomat, and a fighter for human rights, and who is here this morning with us with his dignity, Professor Paulo Sérgio Pinheiro.
De quem saúdo a Comissão Arns.
And I would also like to celebrate Comissão Arns, Miss Laura Greenhalgh. Laura, we have worked in so many different tribunals together. And you just asked Laura this morning, what do we do now, Laura? That's correct. When Laura is not around, we feel a little bit lost. In any case, I would like to say that Professor Zaffaroni was the best choice to read this verdict with all his expertise. I would like to make some brief comments. First, the killing machine. The human killing machine, it has a very specific modus operandi, and it has a specific way of being efficient. One of the first measures taken to exterminate specific groups is to remove the human aspect from these groups, is to treat these groups as if they're not human beings. It's to kill these individuals from a civil and social perspective. This genocidal machine, killing machine, it began when the president stated that, well, the first thing he said was that he was not going to rape a woman because she didn't deserve it. Let's remember that. And I would like to remember that former Attorney General, Ms. Dodgy, who is here with us this morning, he said as well, as a candidate, he said that the quilombolas and Black people, they should be weighted in ounces and they would not serve, not even for procreation purposes. When someone says things like that, you are sowing symbolic verbal violence. And this breeds and opens the doors to physical, actual physical violence. We must learn to identify this killing machine. This is a machine that grinds human meat. And we must learn to identify this so that we never go back to these traumatic, tragic experiences, just like this experience that we've gone through and that has been condemned today by the PPT. And today, just a candidate for government says, well, you seem to be Black, but you're so intelligent. Just today, we've heard this statement. You look so intelligent. You seem to be Black, but you look so intelligent. Today, we have heard this sentence. So we have to identify, we must understand how this machine works, because it works every single day. And the longer we take to identify the ways, the inner workings of this killing machine, this machine that exterminates human beings, the more efficient it will become. You know that lawyers like to speak a lot, and I'm trying to be brief here. Lawyers get excited, they get carried away with their own words, and in most severe cases, they even applaud themselves, and they think they are rocking it when they're actually bothering other people. But in any case, I would like to finalize by thinking what a Black woman who was enslaved, and she killed her own children because they didn't want their children to be enslaved. Many Black enslaved women killed their children because they did not want their children to be enslaved. They thought that was a less painful solution. And a Brazilian samba club sang this in a very beautiful song. But I would like to quote an enslaved man. He was a man who lived close to the city of São Paulo. And he right here nearby where we are. And a person asked this man, "Slave, why did you kill a man?" So a person among 10 million African people removed from their continent is being subjected to a police inquiry because they understood that being in jail was less unhuman than being enslaved. And this man responded, "I didn't kill a man, I killed a werewolf." So that was a context that was designed at removing his human aspect. And that was the bar that measured what a human being is. And we do not have a human being currently as president of our country. This is a werewolf that we have as president. And I would like to say once again the words that that enslaved man said once. And if we don't have the profound and acute perception regarding oppression and also of humanity and of freedom of the Black population, of the Native population, if we don't understand this, this country will never be a true democracy. Thank you very much.
Muito obrigado, Edio, também por sua...
Thank you very much, Mr. Silva, for your words and your generosity. There is some news published today in the newspaper. Police investigates torture of a Black man in a store in the state of Bahia. The man argues he was burned, his hands were burned. Two Black young men, and in both hands, they were burned with hot iron. And they were marked with hot iron. They will take these marks until they die. The image was shot in this. It was a retail store when that happened. There is a video images of that happening, and no one was arrested. No one was arrested. We will certainly act upon this. They were actually marked with hot iron. And this news in the newspaper today. Now, I would like to give the floor to Mr. Belchior, and we are happy to see you again here.
Bom dia.
Thank you. Thank you. Good morning. Good morning. It is a pleasure, Mr. Paulo Sergio, to see you once again. Thank you very much. I would like to say hello to Maria Silva, also the lawyer from the Black movement who is here with us today. Online, we have Mussolini Diaz, who is a quilombola, a reference for the Black movement in Brazil. We also have here with us Mr. Silva and Sheila. Thank you, Comissão Arns, PB, the PSI, Sonia Guajajara. I'm speaking on behalf of the Black Coalition for ICE. I'm a teacher and I am a militant of the Black movement in São Paulo. And I've learned with older people that in the 20th century, we had this idea that the living conditions of Afro-Brazilians, the descendants of enslaved people in Brazil, that this would be less severe than the situation of the Black people in the south of the US, who were also enslaved, or the Black population living in South Africa during the apartheid system. This was an official position of the Brazilian state. It was said that Brazil was a racial democracy at the time. And this lie of racial democracy was denounced in the 70s by a great activist called Abdias do Nascimento. He published a book called The Genocide of Brazilian Blacks, in which he makes a statement about the living conditions of the Brazilian Black population. So the organized Black movement has been denouncing the genocide of the Black population and the meaning of this, the historical meaning of this word. It means the massive murder of a specific group according to ethnic religious criteria. And this happens in Brazil with the killing machine that Mr. Regio Silva just mentioned. And this machine in Brazil is called the state. The Brazilian state is not genocidal due to the existence of Bolsonaro. The Brazilian state is genocidal in all its dimensions. After the founding of our republic, but also when we were an empire and also when we were a colony. Ever since the first white European foot came to our land, we have seen genocidal practices, first regarding native populations and then regarding Black people. It has been 522 years now. We don't want to diminish the severity of the current moment. Well, it has always been a tragedy, the lives of the Black population. Yes, it has always been a tragedy, but we are going through a special moment. This is the moment when a genocidal state, a state that uses its apparatus to exercise violence and to oppress the poor population, whose majority is poor, is Black. It has always promoted genocide, but this state right now encounters a head of state who is clearly genocidal and unhuman. And he said what he was about to do if he became president. He stated it. And the genocidal state with a genocidal manager or a genocidal leader, this encounter is happening in a moment of time when we have a deathly pandemic. When we had a pandemic that should have been managed otherwise, because we have a genocidal state and a genocidal head of state, which led to a catastrophe. We have thousands of people who were murdered. And I'm saying 1 million people because we don't have all records. Many families were shattered. Women who were raising families, they faced threats. And if we also have the orphans. When we look at orphans in Brazil, we will once again see racial criteria for that. And this leads to a catastrophe. We foresaw this catastrophe early in the pandemic. When no one believed the pandemic would be that hard, we would watch the news about the pandemic in other countries. We would watch the news about Italy, for instance. And they were saying, no, only the elderly die because of this disease. That was the information we received, trying to convince us that this was not that severe. When we looked at New York, we saw trucks parked in the backs of hospitals to take the bodies of Black people in New York. And we were thinking this disease will come to Brazil and it will hit some groups harder. The first person murdered by the pandemic, and I say murdered, was a Black domestic worker who was infected by her bosses, who brought the disease from abroad. So this denounce regarding the results of the pandemic the Black movement reacted to that. So when we needed to shelter at home, we realized that, production would not stop because of a pandemic. Of course, a specific social group can shelter at home, but some other groups would have to keep on providing services. They could not shelter at home. A white man jogging and a Black man on top of a bicycle as a working for a delivery app. This is an image that circulated, and this image represented what the pandemic was in Brazil. One social group could protect from the disease, while other social group had to keep on working. The tragedy that hit a population, and I'm talking of informal workers, because we have formal people who also lost their jobs and companies that went broke. But I'm talking about informal workers who supported their families. And in the pandemic, they had to stop selling their goods, selling popsicles and beaches and squares. This population is, in their majority, they are Black. They became more miserable. There's more hunger, and the Black coalition is fighting for the right for emergency relief. We organized campaigns against hunger and pro-vaccines. Numbers show that when the vaccine came to Brazil, it took longer time to reach the Black population. And we know what the results of these actions are. And the responsibility lies in President Bolsonaro's hands. He must be judged in The Hague, and he has just been condemned by this tribunal. He has to be judged in the ballots in October, in the forthcoming elections. This is a historical task ahead of us. This is a genocidal government. It has been genocidal for 4 years, and for 4 years we had to deal with a president that did policies to kill, most of all to kill people who have always been murdered. We allowed for that. That responsibility lies in our hands. But we can correct this in October. The Brazilian population will have this stain for the rest of our lives. We will have to explain to our grandchildren what happened in Brazil between 2018 and 2022.
Muito obrigado do Brasil, senhor.
Thank you very much. And now, for this session, I'd like to invite our last speaker, Sonia Guajajara. Hello, everyone. Good morning. Good morning to all my colleagues who are here with me. I am here very proud representing the articulation of the Brazilian Indigenous Population Brazil, APIB, and I am certain to say that we did not shy away from this genocide plan of the Bolsonaro administration to exterminate our population did not work. 1,186 indigenous individuals who died. That is many for less than 1 million indigenous individuals in Brazil. They were tested with COVID. How many passed away that had no access to the test? How many died through other diseases that they could not also be attended at the hospitals, and many more of sadness, afraid of dying, and so many that I saw dying in my village because of a snake bite, afraid of going to the hospital because they didn't want one to be contaminated with COVID and died in the village with no specific medication to stop the venom of the snake. So we are not only being reached by the virus, many passed away because of COVID, but many also died by the virus of the Bolsonaro administration. That's exactly the virus that now we want to fight back in all ways, to fight them when it comes to the ballots, but also after the elections. Because the Bolsonarism that will remain may continue to killing leaders and people who fight. And we can also say that these individuals were murdered. They were murdered, Douglas, because it wasn't only the contamination of the virus, it was the denial of healthcare attendance. It was the flexibility of the disease, denial of healthcare service in the village, in the quilombos, and also articulated the whole process of letting the cow loose, as it was mentioned, and by Sally's minister at the time that mentioned it, it seemed like organized crime meeting together. They said, let's just let the cow loose while they are distracted with the pandemic. As the indigenous population with our Congresswoman, we also have articulated the legislation, and Bolsonaro vetoed 16 of the 22 drafted in the bill. And you know what was the first point he vetoed? The first one, access to drinkable water. He denied access to drinkable water in the indigenous territory, and denied also hospital bed for the indigenous population that had to leave their village to go to the hospitals. APIB articulated 719 bill, and with that, we requested a plan of the government to face the pandemic, and this plan was met partially, and the government administrations bought 4 versions so it could be accepted by the Supreme Federal Court. They weren't able to draft one single plan with indicators that could stop the pandemic in the indigenous territories. We also articulated the Indigenous Emergency. Daniela Mercury took part with us in the whole movement, nationally and internationally, with indigenous and non-indigenous population, people that are reputable to bring visibility to the genocide and course against the indigenous population. And you know what was the result of this live that we transformed into a web series of 8 episodes? The president of FUNAI transformed that web series into a specific charge against APIB and myself, to charge me of crime against our nation, to disseminate lies against the government. So what else do we need to see to have this government administration considered a genocide administration? What else do we need to see to be considered a genocide against the indigenous population, against the Black population? There has been denial of the attorney's office, of the Congress, and now the Permanent People's Tribunal denies the condemnation of Bolsonaro as genocide against indigenous population. Unfortunately, I cannot leave happy with this partial sentence. Ignoring genocide against the indigenous population, while we have an ongoing genocide in our country, we cannot say we're under a democracy. We cannot consider democracy if there is no understanding that the crime against indigenous population must also be considered a crime against humanity. Why is it so easy to accept ecocide ethnocide, accept all these terms. What about genocide? Why not? Aren't we people? So it is important to say that either Bolsonaro is out or the forest will also be out and all of us with them, because it is us, indigenous population. If there's an ethnocide, is denying our culture, denying our way of living. If there is ecocide, you are denying our territory. And if you deny our territory, you deny our way of life. And it is the indigenous people around the world that are only 5% of the global population, and we protect 82% of biodiversity alive in the world. So if there's no recognition and protection of our right, of our culture, of the way we live, biodiversity is being threatened, and consequently the life in our planet as well. So we are here to give our verdict as indigenous population. Genocide, Bolsonaro out.
Muito obrigado.
Thank you very much, Sonia Guajajara. And now we will stop the session, Authoritarianism and Pandemic, after hearing the sentence of the Permanent People's Tribunal. But please wait until I'm done. Don't leave your seat yet. So I'd like to thank at this closing, first of all the translators of Beatriz Veloso's team, the technicians of Ponto Link team that once again were amazing, the generous team of the law school of the University of São Paulo, represented by Mr. Valdemar, and the press present here, all your attention given to this tribunal, and the students of the law school of the University of São Paulo. So I close then the session of the Permanent People's Tribunal, and we will continue to very brief testimonials that the Arns Commission decided to have this session, as its name calls it, Authoritarianism and Pandemic. We realized it was important to really bring more food for thought in terms of the current scenario we're going through and that we will go through in the next few weeks. So the goal at this point is to have this public manifestation of the Arns Commission on the current situation. It's no discussion about the elections. It's about the present moment, what we're going through, and what we can do, and also the risks that we are carrying. So I should invite, first of all, the president of the Student Council, 11 de Agosto, Manuela Moraes. We would like to thank the Student Council and their collaboration in holding this session. So Manuela has 7 minutes to bring her message. Thank you. It can even be less than that. No, 3 minutes will do. Good morning, everyone. I'm Manuela. I'm the current president of the Student Council, 11 de Agosto, and on behalf of our entity, I'd like to thank you all for being here today. Currently, Brazil has over 684,000 deaths due to coronavirus, due for the fatal negligence of President Bolsonaro. Never we had such evident social inequality. The first person of dying of the virus in Brazil was a maid. So there are no doubts that it shows the necropolitics of Jair Bolsonaro's action was guided by many policies of social control and deaths through the deaths of those considered disposable. So during the severe sanitation crisis that we went through, Jair Bolsonaro, as a denial individual, delayed the purchase of vaccines, did not stipulate the use of masks and vaccinations, efficient methods against the pandemic, and disseminate lies against efficiency of medication that were not approved scientifically for the treatment of those contaminated, and also to speak not respecting deaths and also encouraging evasions to hospitals. So therefore, the fundamental rights of health guaranteed to everyone by the Brazilian Constitution was violated countless times as it incited behavior of the virus circulation, and that resulted in the deaths and the worsening of the life condition of specific individuals from our society, Black, Indigenous, women, the elderly, and the poor, that still to this day are suffering from the loss of the pandemic. As a student, I mean, we should also say that the negligence brought educational gap, especially those that demanded and needed to go to the public schools and for more than 2 years did not go to school. That could have been reduced. So about the quality of life of these people, in March 2020 said, will some die? They will. And some, as he mentions, had color, age, and social class. Some were citizens that depended on the public health system, people in street conditions, those imprisoned, and workers that would pack public transportation every single day, risking their lives on the priority of the president. These some are parents, grandparents, students, nurses, people that had future and dreams. These are lives that should be remembered. I should not forget. Thank you.
Muito obrigado.
Thank you very much, Manuela, for your inspired talk. And I would like to invite my colleague. We've been colleagues for decades now. I will not say for how long we've been colleagues, because I don't want to be hard on our age. Maria Vittoria Benevides. You can say over 50, that would do. It's not the third or fourth age, as we call it here. It's just accumulated youth. That's what I have. It is a great joy to be here speaking as member of the Arns Commission of Defense of Human Rights. And it's a great specific joy as well, due to the decision or the sentence of the Permanent People's Tribunal. Once again, we are together to restate our strong and very strong commitment with a constant protection of democracy, of republic, rule of law, human rights of everyone. In this month of September, we will have the 200th anniversary of our independence, and in October, we will have general election for the executive and legislative representatives, the voice of the people. The best celebration on behalf of the anniversary is the participation of citizens, free and conscious, and with the hope that one vote can bring the renewal and the correction of our path to benefit above and beyond the social groups that are weaker in our society. The indigenous population, the origin population, Quilombola, the poor, marginal population, the unemployed, the abandoned by the public power. The Black population, amazingly, young men and women threatened by racism and violence of the police. The riparian population. So we know that political change is necessary, but we also know mainly that the path is only one to be taken. There will not be democratic future with freedom and social justice that goes without human rights. And we also know that with no justice, there is no peace. Dom Paulo Evaristo Arns, our inspiration on behalf of our commission, blessed us during the hard moments of military dictatorship with one single word: be brave. We shall be brave. We shall also hold hope that is active and takes us forward. Democracy and human rights. A project and a constant process of which it's worth living. And in this moment, in this room, in the student council room where youth is, we shall affirm with the poet that says, I know that life should have been much better, and it shall be. But that should not stop us from repeating it. That it's beautiful, it is definitely beautiful.
Muito obrigado, Maria Vitória. E eu chamo
Thank you very much, Maria Vitória. And before closing, I shall invite Mr. José Carlos Dias. And Daniela Mercury is so important for us, so it's just a whore. Oh, okay. Roy and then José Carlos. 10 minutes. Well, I shall greet everyone, and today I'm very happy, and a bit proud, I must say, because This was an amazing morning. I believe this will be here to stay. It will be a hallmark, a milestone in our history, as our companion Luisa mentioned. Well, speaking after Maria Victoria is not fair. I mean, what shall I do at this point? I mean, she's not only a great speaker, she is who she is, but I'll try. And then there's a support of a certain Daniela Mercury. I mean, come on, that is definitely not fair. So in a few days, we will be celebrating our 200th anniversary as independent country, September 7th. It's a contradicting date, but there is no doubt that is an important one. Our independence came out of much difficulty, an agreement of slave masters that kept slavery, still with the extermination of the indigenous population, but there were sectors that were very radical, and there was a moment where it was important. It was a limited independence.
Construído. A nação começou a ser construída.
But yes, we started building it, and the people actually were responsible for building it. Even under slavery, they produced it. And it just carried on and on, building this amazing country. There was a miracle. We could have 10 Brazils. It's a miracle. We were just, we remain as a big nation, a big, wonderful, mixed people. So I believe we shall celebrate September 7th. We definitely shall. We shall sing our national anthem. I love it. However, actually, I shall remind you of another anthem, which we used to sing during the military dictatorship. Freedom, freedom, open your wings over us. From the fights, under the thunderstorms, we will hear your voice. As you can see, Daniela, I did not even try to sing. Otherwise, you would just follow me and it would be hard on me. So that's what I have to say. It's a beautiful anthem. Why? Because it claims freedom. But what is it? It is a consequence of democracy. If there's no democracy, we have no freedom. We know how military dictatorship was back then. But we have a frail democracy, a limited one. What has been, explained how the poor population suffers the violence of racism, still the extermination of the indigenous population. 500 years, let me tell you. So our democracy is very limited. So what do we need? We need a democracy, but much more democracy, much more. There is a long path ahead of us. We need to carry on and on to broaden our democracy. But once we claim such democracy, we have our 200th anniversary that is just taken down, torn down, as a celebration called by the higher authority in the beautiful beaches of Rio, with motorcycle arcades, military events, somber clouds. We can't be happy. We're sad and concerned. But it doesn't mean we'll be back home. We need to go out to the streets, out to fight. We're going to fight back so that we can have the 200th anniversary of our fight and of democracy that can go even further. Long live the Brazilian people.
Muito obrigado, José Luiz Del Roy.
Thank you very much, José Luis Del Roy. Now I shall pass the floor to our president, who will close. And after that, we will have Daniela Mercury, obviously. But I shall remind you that she has some other bonds with us, other than what she beautifully does. She's an ambassador of UNICEF, then Fund of the United Nations for Children, and also member of the Observatory of Human Rights of the National Council for Justice. And she works with Manuela, isn't that right? Please take the floor. Ladies and gentlemen, this room means much to me, and I've repeated that because here is where I started to believe in democracy. And this room became even more beautiful when I recall that it was the nursery of the Arns Commission. It was here where it all started, right in this room. And now we are going through another moment that when we say, stop, we don't want any more crimes. Enough is enough. We don't want that against our people, our nation. It is amazing to imagine that a main Argentinian jurist, member of the Supreme Court, and a major Italian jurist laid their eyes on our reality and came to the conclusion that we are presided by a criminal, an offender, by an offender against humanity. It's not only genocide, there's a set of offenses that he practiced together with his team, because he is the leader of the largest family criminal organization in our planet. So we're not here to play games. September 7, we will all who defend human rights will be ready. And we will always be there preaching peace against this unsold president and with weapons representing our country. We have the right to sing, cry, smile, scream, laugh, and show our indignity against what this man is doing against all the people in our society. We will go out to fight before Brazil is fully torn down.
Formidável, Zé Carlos, formidável.
Amazing, José Carlos. Now, I pass the floor to Daniela Mercury. Hello. I would like to sing with everyone. Let me just place myself right here behind everyone. I would just like to greet you all. I would just like to reiterate what everyone has mentioned. I'd like to say that I'm a citizen here as an artist, and I saw all that you've mentioned. I was a witness to all of this. I cried, fought, showed my dignity in the last 2 to 3 years, and I have been during my whole life from a young age, so that democracy can be democracy, because it's still not. We say I want more and more, but it's not there yet, because until we have one person not respected, that is not full democracy, and we will still not have it. And I know that was mentioned many ways, that was very clear, but we are 30 days before the election. This is not a party seeker event. We have a great part of the population that still does not understand what this verdict means. It just confirms what all of us saw. I mean, it confirms that there is a werewolf leading this country, and that we cannot let him remain as the leader in the administration, because the democracy will not resist another 4 years. All the impeachment requests were set aside, all the manifestations of society, of civil society. And this is one more cry 30 days before the election, because the jurists were careful enough, strict enough, which is what we expect from justice, to be able to evaluate what is going on, which I know is very hard. So I don't want to extend myself, because there are some songs that can speak a bit. Who am I to represent this country that is so diverse artistically, right here next to Sonia Guajajara, of a main representative of the Afro-Brazilian culture. And then we could choose some music genres that we identify with. And for that reason, I remember a statement of one of my songs. Samba claimed the independence of Brazil. It's called I Want a Samba for President. And I wrote a song, Edio, in the beginning of this pandemic. I was so alarmed with what was going on that I went after the name to the person who is in power and who kept doing what you all mentioned here. And I came to the word werewolf because I was looking for the right term. And then I made a song called The Bad Thing, because it's a bad thing. And then you can call fascism, segregation, misogynism. I mean, all different types of horrendous actions that we've seen over and over again in a government administration that we never expected to have in such an amazing country, as it was mentioned before, as we are all passionate about. So as an artist, it's been really hard. I know many of the artists and all citizens of our country. So I'll sing this song that says, a bit inspired on Gonzaguinha singer, because we need to keep resisting. It's not good, it's still not good, but they can be much better. It depends on us now. In the elections, we cannot let this massacre to carry on, this genocide that we've seen historically and that is more present, of the indigenous populations, the native population.
Salvador, que é uma das cidades mais violentas do mundo.
The city of Salvador, that's one of the most violent cities in the world. So I always say that the samba claimed independence, and I would like to start with the native indigenous population. It's called Dona desse Lugar, for the Terena population, because I was one that was there, and she sang to me a song, and I didn't know how to thank her. And I said, before Brazil was Veracruz, the first inhabitants were walking around Tapuia, Tupis, Guaranis, Tapachós, the oldest alliance, the voice of our grandparents, our forefathers, a civilization of a God that wasn't Christian and made the forest, the life on the forest, hard. So I am a perennial indigenous population. And Daniela Mercury is now singing her famous song.
Aí eu cito dezenas de
And then I
etnias.
mentioned many ethnicities, because there are over 500 languages of our people, which is the Brazilian people. before and foremost. And then the African population came, and we're beautiful as we are with all the rhythms and all that we have physically and culturally. We have amazing food. Who would be us without the Africans now? And that's how I sing. And then the Portuguese come, and they bring the colonization, the contribution, and now we need to carry on, because the present will start in a month, and we need to get rid of everything that is bad. And we still do have a chance. So my samba says, samba is called Samba Can't Wait. Dream can't wait, samba can't stop, and love can't wait. And now she's singing her very famous song.
O povo não pode calar, a liberdade não pode esperar, dar a volta por cima. O dia a dia do povo tem sido um calvário, um sufoco. Você, como erva daninha, mata aos poucos, tira o ar, ameaça a democracia, sua tirania quer nos calar. Mas as ruas são da liberdade, a expressão da vontade que não pode esperar. Você, animal traiçoeiro que anda em matilha e ataca por trás, faz piada e gargalha da morte como um bando de hienas sobre restos mortais. Quem apoia seu mal é cruel, desumano, fascista e sem coração. Quem não sente a dor do seu povo é um agente egoísta que não vale um tostão. Coisa ruim destruiu nossa casa, causou tanto estrago, tristeza e horror. Sua maldade matou tanta gente que, indignado, o tempo parou. Mas o amor é a força da vida que explode no peito dessa multidão. É a insurreição colorida brotando na avenida como flor do sertão. O sonho não pode esperar, o samba não pode parar, o amor não pode esperar, o verso e a rima, o futuro não pode esperar. O povo não pode calar, a liberdade não pode esperar, dar a volta por cima. Ouviram do Ipiranga as margens plácidas.
Now she's singing the Brazilian anthem.
E o sol da liberdade em raios fúlgidos brilhou no céu da pátria nesse instante. Se o penhor
desta igualdade conseguimos conquistar com braço forte em teu seio, ó liberdade, desafia o nosso peito à própria morte.
Ó Mátria amada, idolatrada, salvação.
Brasil, um sonho intenso, um raio vívido de amor
e de esperança a terra desce. Em teu formoso céu risonho e límpido, a imagem do cruzeiro resplandece.
Gigante pela própria natureza,
forte impávido colosso, e o teu futuro
espelha essa grandeza, terra dourada.
Entre outras mil és tu, Brasil, ó pátria amada.
Dos filhos desse solo és mãe, gentil pátria amada, Brasil.
Deitado eternamente em berço esplêndido, ao som do mar e à luz do céu profundo, fulguras, ó Brasil, florando América, iluminado ao sol do novo mundo, do que a terra mais garrida.
Teus sonhos lindos campos têm mais flores.
Nossas vozes anseio mais amores. Pátria amada, idolatrada, salvação. Amor eterno seja
símbolo.
Lábaro de ostentas estrelado. Fica o pôr de louro desta flama. Paz no futuro e glória no passado. Mas segues da justiça clava forte. Verás que o filho teu não foge à luta, nem teme quem te adora a própria morte. Terra adorada, entre outras mil és tu, Brasil, ó pátria amada. Dos filhos
gente amada, Brasil.
E vai ter uma fila da bexiga.
Buenas tardes a todas y a todos.
Tchau para todos.
Bye bye, everyone.
Ciao Gianni.
Vai falar mais
Ciao.
nada.
A tutti, grazie. Ciao.
Bene, grazie.
Gracias. Ciao.
Grazie, ciao.